7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, how can Uganda mitigate the negative effects of climate change if current carbon trading negotiations fail? UN climate talks in Doha closed on Saturday with a historic shift in principle but few genuine cuts in greenhouse gases. The summit established for the first time that rich nations should move towards compensating poor nations for losses due to climate change. Developing nations hailed the talks as a breakthrough but condemned the gulf between the science of climate change and political attempts to tackle it. The deal, agreed by nearly 200 nations, extends the Kyoto Protocol to the year 2020. It is the only legally binding plan for combating global warming at present. The deal covers Europe and Australia, whose share of world greenhouse gas emissions is less than 15%. The United States has also signed up, even though with reservations. Much as many consider this as a watershed in the talks, the carbon trading negotiations are not going well, with developed nations still hesitant to compensate developing nations for the damage carbon emissions from industrialized nations do to the rest of the world. And so on Spectrum tonight, we speak with the Ugandan delegation to the Doha climate talks to find out how we as a developing nations can create coping mechanisms for the negative effects of the changes in the climate in case carbon trading negotiations collapse altogether. Our guests tonight, Professor John Kaddu, Professor of Zoology at Makerere University and the lead negotiator at the recently concluded Qatar Doha Climate Change Conference, specializing in adaptive policies. You're most welcome, Professor Kaddu.
Thank you very much.
We're also joined by Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, Chief Executive Officer of Agency for Transformation, also a former chairperson of the Uganda Farmers Federation. You're most welcome, Mr. Rwakakamba.
Thank you, Edmond, former manager for policy at Uganda National Farmers Federation.
Former manager for policy.
Yes. Yeah.
We're also joined on the line by Mr. Chebet Maikut-lead, negotiator on shared vision and international carbon trading policy think tank. Mr. Maikut, are you with us now? Well, we're still trying to get hold of him. He'll join us as soon as we can get him on the line. Professor Kaddu, what is climate change?
Climate change is the change in the weather that lasts for a long time. In simple language, that's what it is.
How does it manifest itself?
The manifestation, the best way of understanding that or visualizing it, you think about yourself. You go to bed when you're feeling cold, then you cover yourself with a blanket. Now the heat generated from your body gradually covers the space between your body and the blanket. And with the time, you start feeling warm, the bed feels warm. Similarly, the earth has the atmosphere. Now, over many years, industries in industrialized countries have been pumping various kind of gases, carbon dioxide, methane in the atmosphere. And the gases have covered the atmosphere like a blanket. And that has caused the rise in the temperature on the Earth's surface. And that's the global warming.
Well, but we have the sun sending sun rays from way beyond the atmosphere. It should be hotter than the gases we emit from here on planet Earth.
Yes, there is what we call an ozone layer. Now it means that the heat coming from the Earth's surface cannot readily escape the way it used to be because of this coverage. It remains in, and that gradually goes on increasing. And hence the need to find ways of reducing the emissions and the reduction of the coverage of the Earth's surface.
So the ozone layer is the blanket in your analogy, and when the sun's rays come down, they are filtered through, so the heat that we get on Earth is protected, it's been sifted.
That's right. That's right.
And the energy that we create from here, the gases that we create, the CFCs, chlorofluoro, methane, the methane gases, CFC, I can't complete it, they are more dangerous than the sun's rays as they come through.
They are more dangerous indeed, they are, over a long time.
We'll get back to the technical side, but Morrison, how does this affect poor nations? Can you explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, I think it does. And for countries like Uganda, where you have over 70 to 80% people employed in agriculture who are actually farmers, you find that it's very difficult for them, because farmers on a daily basis interact with the environment, they interact with the climate, and you still have farmers who are absolutely nature-based, whose enterprises, especially crop farmers, even animal farmers, really depend on weather. So changes in weather, for instance, past 4 years have caused a lot of damage, Edmond. You know that in 2008, the floods, the intermittent rains that resulted into floods in places like Amuria and Kamuli, I think farmers and the economy there lost about 30,000 tons of pulses and about 40,000 tons of cereals. That amounted to a lot of money, and also exacerbated hunger and food insecurity in that area. We have had extreme landslides. So, you know, unless a solution is found, first of all by rich nations investing into mitigative capabilities of all countries across the world, and also nation states in Africa also find means to promote adaptation, such that our farmers, such that everybody else can be resilient, I think it is still going to be absolutely difficult. And what was unfortunate for the past COPs are cooperation of parties, starting with Copenhagen, where I attended that meeting representing farmers under the rubric of International Federation of Agricultural Producers, then moving on to Mexico, Durban, and now Doha. You find that the agenda is relegating the farmers, because the main thinking across the world is that farmers' activities actually increase climate change, animals that release carbon and all that kind of stuff. But our argument has always been that if farmers are well educated, if farmers have the information, then they have the capacity to, first of all, mitigate climate change, but also adapt to it through pursuing conservation and ecosystem services that would sequestrate carbon.
Let's talk about the sources of these dangerous gases that deplete the ozone layer. Yeah. Can you list them for us?
Well, it's really carbon dioxide. It's all these industrial nations have got a big carbon footprint because of emitting these gases. There are none. I think there are a number of gases.
You can write them down. You have carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane.
Yeah, all that.
Different proportion, of course.
Absolutely. Because I think Africa contributes less than 4%.
It's about 2%.
About 2%.
2 and 3%.
Yeah.
Africa's contribution. The US is about 25%.
Yeah, and you see all these nations. By the way, the most annoying part is that all the commitments from Copenhagen to Durban and all these places of resources invested in the developing world to mitigate and manage carbon footprint, commitments are there, yes, but less than 10% of the money has been released to developing countries. So that's the money that they keep on recycling. So every other meeting in the cooperation of parties, they come and say we are making this commitment when they are just pulling the money that they had, committed on in the last meeting. So it's really a pity, and I think our own negotiators in these developing countries, they need to find more strategies. They need to be more sharper. They need to be more agile and pick out deals that are manageable and deals that can be implemented. There are quite a number of climate change politics, Edmond, that when our negotiators, just like they go to Doha and this World Trade Organization, and they are put into green rooms, and there are so many meetings, there is a lot of confusion. I remember we were in Denmark in that famous Bera Center, and it was even very, very difficult. You find US is taking these ones, China is taking these ones, and they are the ones anyway who pay for you to go there. So at the end of the day, there is lack of strategy from most of the African countries to say these are our core demands, and we want to stick to these core demands to make sure that we save the nation, our countries from the climate.
Yes.
Just a correction there.
Yes. Yes, Professor. Go ahead.
The negotiation normally is planned over 3 weeks. Now, the first week, you have the negotiating groups, the different negotiating groups. You have the developing countries, you got the G77 in China, and you got the LDCs, the small island developing states, and all this and that. So during this first week, they strategize on what their priorities are. And in the second week, you have the developing countries. That's the real negotiation. Developing versus the developed countries. And in the third week, you have what we call the high segment. That's when the ministers come, heads of state in some cases. And they come to own it, of course, to own it. And also, other aspect they cover is to tackle aspects, elements of negotiation that require political engagement, where the technical people have failed to come to convergence. You refer that to the political segment. So usually, and over the years, look back from the 2008 to look up at Copenhagen, there's been a shift. Because around 2008, 2009, the developing countries were pushing the developed countries to fulfill their commitment. And of course, the convention, the United Nations Framework Convention, to which Uganda is a signatory, and any other country that has signed that convention has commitments, an obligation to fulfill commitments for the developed countries, to assist the developing countries because of their little contribution to the program. Now, initially the argument was that the contribution in terms of finance should be tagged to the index of the cost of living. Those countries that have emitted a lot, those countries that have been producing in their factories over many years, they have high income, their GDP is high, so they should correspondingly contribute more. Now, this, in a way one could think that they were cornered, so there has been a shift, so that the shift from multilateral funding, where the developed countries put the money in the central kit, the basket for access by the developing countries. Gradually we're seeing a shift to multilateral funding, country to country. And that's where I see the negotiations moving.
We're moving from multilateral funding to bilateral.
Can I just chip in?
Yes, Morrison.
You see the problem with most of our negotiators and most African countries, they look at the funding from the developed countries as a favor when it is supposed to be a responsibility. And I think they need to go and negotiate because we are not the ones emitting this carbon. You developed nations that are highly industrialized, that have not improved the technology that would cut the carbon, you are the ones raising this carbon footprint. So why should African countries, for instance, why should Caribbean countries pay for it? It should be those countries that do it. So I would want our negotiators, not only in Uganda, but across Africa and South America, to go with that agenda. And for me, that is how they will succeed. And also a mechanism for following up these commitments, because they are never, they put some complications that most of our negotiators never follow. And maybe, Edmond, I mean, Uganda, we have lived it. We are witnessing, in most cases, a deepening water crisis. I've been moving around the country. If you look at rivers like Nyamwamba, that used to be huge, huge rivers, the sanctuaries to even hippopotamus are now at the ebb of drying up, at the blink. You have rivers like Mporogoma, River Ruizi. All these rivers are drying up. See, so a crisis is in the face of us, and I think that the leadership in this country and across across East Africa, they need to take the issue of climate change quite seriously. You know, we only remember climate change when we have a disaster, when you have slides, landslides in Bududa. That's when you hear people, members of parliament and others, talking about climate change. Even the same thing in the US, before they have Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, they never talk about this climate change, but it's a reality, and scientists have told us this, and people who lived before know that the world has changed. The other aspect that maybe we need to talk about is, even when this little money from developing countries or industrial or companies that come here to buy, to buy carbon sequester situations, where is this carbon trade money? Where is carbon money? There is a veil in most of these East African and African countries about how people who are involved in sequestrating or sinking carbon can access that money. Who owns the forests?
Let's hear first of all.
Yes.
Talk to us about carbon trade. What exactly is carbon trade?
Carbon trade is it's really about trading your capacity to sink carbon. If you are an industry in China and you are emitting thousands, or I don't know how they calculate that, of carbon, but you find that I have a forest in Rukunjiri that is sinking, scientifically proven is sinking a certain amount of carbon. So we exchange. So I sell to you, that carbon credit. It means that
you can emit gases.
You can emit gases because somebody somewhere in the world, in a place called Rukunjiri, is sinking that carbon. So because of that, you remain you remain green and compliant. That's the idea. But there has been some carbon trading in this country, but it's not visualized. It's not in the people's arena. You hear some people are getting carbon money, but smallholder farmers who own small forests don't have an idea how it is traded and how they can benefit from this, from the carbon money that exists in the country.
Professor Kaddu, there seems to be a direct correlation between the amount of carbon emitted with the level of GDP. 1/4 of global production comes from the US and 5%. They emit 1/4 or 25% of global carbon. Africa contributes to between 2 and 3% of the world's economy. It emits between 2 and 3% of the carbon. What is the unfairness when poor countries complain against developed countries?
Well, the unfairness is the amount of, call it compensation as it were, to cause least to the problem, but the commitment to assist you in alleviating or adapting is not forthcoming. If I could shift the talk a little bit, if you look at the various ecosystems in the country, think about Uganda, the highland ecosystem, the lowland ecosystems, we need quite a bit of study to see the dynamics of carbon emission and the dynamics of sinking. Up on Mount Ruwenzori, for example, you got the rivers coming down. You got coffee growing along the river streams. Now, with the global warming, you have a reduction in the water gradually. Now, at the same time, you have the population, human population, getting more land upwards in terms of altitude. Now, you need some cost-benefit analysis on that. What would be the impact of reduced water from the rivers in terms of coffee growing, and what would be the benefit, as it were, of land becoming more available going up. So a lot of studies need to be done. Now, at Doha, for the first time, we had this Article 6 of the Convention. Article 6 of the Convention is about education. There is also the Nairobi program within the climate change process. Now, the Nairobi program is about research so that countries get informed, science-based information. So countries need to get involved into research in terms of cost-benefit analysis. Also, we need to look at climate change not only as a problem. You need to find out, are there any opportunities available by that? An example, if you have increased rains, you capture the water and put in the dams so that you benefit. You grow fish, aquaculture, because of the water where it was not really available. So a lot of research needed, and looking at climate change again as an economic issue. an economic issue which causes problems, but there are windows of benefit, so we need to exploit that. In that way, the adaptation actions could be enhanced.
What's the carbon footprint?
Morrison. My friend Morrison.
Yeah, I mean, carbon footprint is the amount of carbon that is released into the atmosphere. So a human being has a certain level of carbon footprint. A cow has a carbon footprint, and a number of other. It's about what systems emit. So that's the footprint. So this whole conversation and this whole debate has been about the ability to reduce that, because increase the carbon footprint means global warming, and with it comes the intermittent rains and floods that the professor said can be captured, but usually the intensity is so hard that you have more destruction than actually what you can keep and be damned. And you have long droughts that are so... And you see, for farmers, again, Professor, is that that climate change also comes with the diseases. So it's true there are opportunities, but on the balance of the balance sheet, the problems that come with climate change are more. These diseases like weeds, banana weeds, and these other diseases that farmers have never known, they have a link to climate change.
This is Spectrum Radio 1. We'll go for a break. We'll be back to stay tuned.
Welcome to the MTN Service Center, sir.
Hey.
How can I help you?
We are here to buy MTN SIM cards.
Okay.
Meet my wife and my daughter and my son. This is my father, my mother and my cousin.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Hey, I need even for my auntie piece. Hey, come close, auntie piece. Behind her is my mechanic and my newspaper vendor and my boss and the pastor.
Okay, sir.
This Christmas, buy an MTN SIM card to win free airtime for a year. Dial *188# to win. 250 winners will immediately be notified on SMS each day. Win free airtime for a year with MTN this Christmas. Terms and conditions apply.
And of course, there is my brother, my electrician, my plumber, and my baba's best friend's girlfriend.
MTN. Everywhere you go.
Ça va, hello. My name is Kogole Andemina, very serious Congolese tailor. People see me when they want to look good. People leave my shop looking like superstars of TV. But however much I make you look beautiful or even sexy like me, I cannot change the person inside, the real you. Kind of like Uganda Waraji. It has this beautiful look, but inside they have maintained the same old spirit that we know. The same old spirit we have known for many years in a new suit. New look. Oh, you need to try it.
Enjoy the new look Uganda Waraji. The same Ugandan spirit with a new look. Uganda Waraji. Same spirit, new look.
Uganda Waraji.
Excessive consumption of alcohol is harmful to your health. Not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly.
To all our Western Union customers, do not become a victim of fraud. There are many ways fraudsters are using to target unsuspecting people. Do not proceed with your transaction if it's to a grandchild, friend, or family member for an emergency situation you have not personally confirmed. Someone you personally don't know or have met online could be a fraudster. Remember, the money transfer can be paid out to the receiver within a short time, and after the money is paid, you cannot obtain a refund from Western Union, even if the transfer was a result of fraud. Only use Western Union for sending money to friends and family. Western Union, moving money for better.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Welcome back on Spectrum tonight. How can Uganda mitigate the negative effects of climate change if current carbon trading negotiations fail? Our guest tonight, Professor John Kaddu, Professor of Zoology at Makerere University, and the lead negotiator at the recently concluded Doha Climate Change Conference, specializing in adaptive policies. Also, Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, CEO, Agency for Transformation, and a former manager of the Uganda Farmers Federation. You will be able to call in and contribute to this discussion. Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, talk to us about how we reverse this negative effects of climate change.
I think for starters, there has to be, we need mass education, mass awareness about the dangers of climate change. But also, more importantly, is that we need to also push towards enforcement. There is a lot of biomass degradation going on in this country, where we are losing forest cover at a rate that is unprecedented. So, can we stop encroachment on these forests? Can we plant forests in this country and across East Africa, because anyway climate change has no borders, such that on our part we have got a responsibility for the present and future generation to protect our ecosystem. I think it's really going to be very, very important. Wetlands being encroached on left, right and center with impunity. Can the authorities, NEM and others, be able to protect some of these ecosystems that we have in this country? But by and large, I know that government, World Bank and others are investing a lot of money in providing clean water to most of the people by constructing gravity water schemes, by sinking boreholes. But what is happening is that most of those water sources actually dry up, and you find you have invested billions of money in gravity water scheme, and it dries up, and certainly because of adjuncts of climate change. And you get to learn that you see with water there are no alternatives. For energy you can have alternatives, but for water you don't. So we just have to be very careful and mainstream climate change in all our policies, whether in the National Development Plan, in our budget architecture, to make sure that we implement it correctly.
And in homes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Professor Kaddu, what was the change of the latest round which you attended in Doha, Qatar, in the Middle East? And was it, well, there's always been this argument that, you know, the poor countries are judged unfairly. Can you give us some perspective there?
Yes, a number of new avenues as to work streams came on board. One of these is the response to Article 6 of the Convention, and Article 6 is about climate change education. For the first time, the work program was, the decision on work program was achieved so that climate change education is incorporated within the climate change issues by the Secretariat of the NFCC. This means a lot. It means that educational institutions, countries can lobby funding where it is available with approval, the process for the COP. Another area which has taken time but gradually has crept in is gender, the gender aspect of climate change. That's a very, very important aspect. As you know, by the way, when you talk about gender, it's not necessarily about women, as you know. But in terms of domestic operations, women suffer a lot when there's no water, when there's no firewood and this sort of thing, when there's a drought and they can't get the food from the shambas. So the gender issues are being strongly emphasized. They've come on board very, very strongly. In fact, in the Uganda delegation, there were a number of ladies, some are members of parliament, others outgoing members of parliament who attended this. And so that is a very, very highly welcome aspect. Those two elements, education and gender.
So you're happy with the outcomes from the Doha round of talks?
Not 100%, you're never 100%. As I mentioned earlier on, there has been a gradual trend towards but the developed countries. In terms of negotiation, decision, drafting the decision, using non-committal language, COP decides, that's what we want, but they prefer COP requests the developed countries to assist, rather than making a decision that the developed countries are not
binding them.
Yeah. So they are gradually evading that, and that's what prolongs the negotiation. You can spend time around that. You want to restructure the decision.
The texts so in the corridors, lobbying and so on.
Even in the room, where you face them.
In the green room.
Oh, yes, right. But you push them so that you need a language which commits them.
And they don't want to be committed because they still want to use the refrigerator. Is that the refrigerator is a big component? They use the refrigerator uses CFC, which destroys the environment. It's one of the bad, one of the worst. The US has signed on this time. Is that on a landmark, Professor?
Yeah, maybe my colleague can comment on that.
Because in the past they've tried to avoid
the
lower emissions of carbon.
The US had committed, I think, over $700 million around 4 years ago, which was
$1 million.
Yeah, which was never realized, because I think President Obama got fixed into economy issues back at home, and the issue of climate change, which is very unpopular with the right. That is, most of the Republicans never did come on table, and he had run a campaign saying he's going to slow the rise of oceans and all that stuff, but it never happened. So we think now that his administration, now that he won a second term, he should be able to invest in some of those important but unpopular legislations that would push Congress to pass a budget. But you see, again, from Professor Kaddu's statement, you see, why request for an assistance? This should really be a clear demand of that you're cheating, you have to pay up. You see? But when these developed countries like patronizing Africa, they like patronizing, the Caribbean and South America, so they come, give us assistance. You see, we are facing our negotiators from Africa must go to say, we have made the calculations, this is the carbon that you developed countries are emitting, you need to pay for it, and this is how much it will cost. And for me, that should be the beginning and the end of that negotiation. Otherwise, we waste a lot of time in these processes and nothing ever comes. This is why most of them, China, US and others, even after making commitments, they don't pay up. They create situations that make them not to release that money, and it is always recycled, which I think is a problem.
What is the safest energy, Professor? We know that firewood, oil, which we like a lot in our vehicles and so on. What are the safest energies that we can use to mitigate?
In terms of cleanliness?
Yeah, clean energies.
I could look at myself. What do I use? I use biogas from cow dung, paddy firewood, of course, and the electricity. But there is a monetary aspect on that. I find in terms of cooking, biogas is also free, because I feed my animals and the excreta and turn it around so that I have zero waste. So the electric power cylinder should be very safe from the point of view of
hydroelectric power. Is there a
call? It can be solar, depending on the what system you have. If you have got endless sun, like in the Middle East, every country in Israel must have a solar panel for warming, for power generation. If you go to Arua, in this country, the radio patches, 80% of their electricity is from panels. So the sun we have, that's where, again, I said the research, we need the research so that we develop our system. We tap with the
solar energy, wind energy, hydropower.
Yes, no. Wind, you need an expanse of
open space. Like Victoria, or islands.
Where the wind
can gain momentum, yes.
Gains momentum. You could try and like Victoria, but these are urban. We have had some wind aspect in Kampala lighting along Entebbe Road.
They tried it, just did seem to work. Lighting the streets.
Yeah, that sort of
it seemed to work.
So maybe that's not the best place. But hydro, we have mini hydro. You shouldn't think about the heavy big dams, but the little. Liba Mobuku, you get the mini hydro by the missionaries there. Then solar run water pumps like the one we have in Moyo district, the Christian center. They have in that place. They have water pumps which again, so the mini hydro for the hydro power and the solar aspect for the solar-based electricity.
And Morrison, what can the average Ugandan contribute toward reversing his climate?
Yeah, I think I do agree with Professor Kaddu that it begins with all of us taking part and doing our role. And one of the things is that companies must green up. You see, they must turn green. If we start with a company like Radio 1 and like Abozi, are they using paper to print? Are they overprinting? That is not good for the climate, you see. If we go into government, is government willing to fully implement implement e-government such that there is less printing and companies are turning green and they are not using a lot a lot of energy. Also recycling. You see, if you buy recycled paper, that should be very important for companies and for citizens. And for farmers especially, I think they need to go back to conservation practices like that keep water into the soil. They also need to use new ways of managing energy, like low-learner stoves, such that you don't have a lot of use for firewood and you save. We run away from this unbelievable biomass degradation. So yes, at an individual level, at a family level, there is a lot that we can do, and at the office and company level, there is a lot to be done. At the governmental level, there is a lot to be done. And also, most importantly, is that climate and environmental issues have no borders, so there have to be clear collaboration with the other nation states across the world to make sure that we have got a deliberate and a joint intervention.
Perhaps we could give some credit here.
Yes.
Think about, you can use your mobile phone, you can start home and pay your water bills. You don't have to drive now to go to pay your water bills.
Yes, you can use the mobile phone. Basically, you're saying use less fuel, less energy, less petrol.
So these are some of the credits we could think we can give this nation.
Or ride a bicycle instead of driving.
Exactly, that's what I do. I do not drive to go and buy a razor blade. I walk, get exercise, or use a bicycle, go and buy a piece of bread. Never the car or a motorbike, but a bicycle. So again, we need to think about, sometimes I like to look at both sides of the coin, give credit, and development is a process. I think, mind you, the climate change issue is starting to take root down the communities. Right today, we've been looking at the strategy for the climate change policy. Now the country has a climate change policy, and that of course opens up a lot of things because you have a framework within you can operate. Before the climate change policy was available, people say, under what arrangement are we operating? Now that is there, I think to also hasten or speed up the drive which you are making towards green.
Yes, Morrison.
Yeah, you know, I think most of our leaders have been talking about harnessing the wind and harnessing the sun in order to provide alternate sources of energy, which I think is really going to be very important. And a way that we find biofuels such that we can power our cars using fuels that do not emit a lot of carbon, or these like electricity, and these fuels that are not fossil based, like biofuels. And this is why I agree with leaders in Uganda who say that we actually needed to get our oil out of the soil very fast in Uganda. Said it out because in the next 30, 40 years, the prices, first of all, more people would have shifted into biofuels, and these fossil fuels do not have a lot of market across the world because they are not green.
Let's get that clearly. At some stage, we'll stop using fuel. That way
absolutely.
Oil will be worthless, like something else.
Absolutely.
And what other things can we use? Explain that to us. What other energies, if your car has been using fuel, what kind of cars shall we be driving?
Yeah, we can Chira EV4 if it can be commercialized and marketed to their, they run on batteries, electric cars. They are already so many in Germany, so many in the United States. So if that technology,
Asia as well, China, India.
Absolutely, and I think that's going to be very important to reduce the carbon footprint of the country.
In fact, in China, the pre-COP, they're doing the COP 16 in Mexico.
Yes.
The preparatory meetings were held in China. But along the road, even the elder ladies, you think they're riding a bike, but each one has a battery at the back.
They're charging the battery as they ride.
That's right. Charging mobile phone using the dynamo of the motor.
The bicycle.
All those sort of, they sound little, but they have an impact in that. People get entrenched into the system. The greening drive becomes entrenched in the system. So they have a lot, and this is something we could achieve in this country.
Morrison, perhaps before we hear from the listeners, talk to us about carbon compensations. What exactly do they talk about what do they mean when they talk about carbon compensations?
It's the same. It's this carbon trade that I was talking about. If you're emitting a lot of carbon, you need to buy carbon credit somewhere.
From another place.
From another place.
For a forest.
From a person who is sinking carbon. Because for you are emitting, somebody is sinking. So you have to sink your carbon by buying that credit, that space.
And the point is, an average person in Uganda, in Chibuga or wherever, and they have a forest with broad leaves, not pine forest. They don't. Can you explain that to us a little bit? How forests actually absorb carbon?
Yeah, it's within their system, and the more years a tree lives, that's why these natural forests are very important, because they take in a lot of carbon, because they have been on planet for quite a long time. Young trees take lesser, it's sinking lesser carbon. So it's forests that are so grown up, that are natural forests that usually take in a lot of carbon. So this is why I'm saying that the carbon trade in Uganda is still a varied process. I think groups like the National Forest Authority and others that have been involved in it, they need to be clear, such that even if you own a small forest, but if it's a group of farmers who own in a collective way, who own a big forest, should be able to apply as a group and be able to benefit from the carbon money.
Let's hear from the listeners. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. You can call in now. Our number is 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-261-390. When you're calling, please tell us your name and where you're calling from. As we wait to hear from the listeners, talk to us about carbon sequestration. Okay, Spectrum, hello? Hello?
Yes, this is Edmond from Chebet.
Mr. Chicken, yes?
So I just asked what the
biomass what? Oh, you went before you could get clarity on that. I thought I had something like biomass sequestration. Yes, Spectrum, hello?
Hello?
Yes, sir, your name? Hello? We lost you. You can still call back. Yes, Spectrum, hello? Hello? Good evening, my friend. Your name again? Yes, Pete. Yeah.
I just want to know from the government of Uganda, perhaps an opportunity will arise when you bring people from the government as to what has happened to the national approach rules called the NAPAL on mitigation and adaptation of the issue of climate change. This was launched to the Commission. How it is operationalized? Because the country is seriously facing the impacts of climate change, but we don't think about it as Morrison said. There is no reasonable plan and program and activity for the public and making the issues in the general public domain. So that's the major challenge that is facing our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter Wamogamjiria. Let's get back to the studio. Professor Kaddu.
Thank you very much. Now, I thank the listener very much. He touched on the NAPAs. NAPAs means the National Adaptation Programs of Action, the NAPA. Now, he said, what happened with the NAPAs? Now, this was an exercise, this was a short-term exercise to identify the aspect that must be communicated to the international community about requirements for this country, about the problems, identifying what action should be done. That exercise was done successfully. The NAPA document was produced. It identified vulnerabilities. The NAPA exercise identified suffering, as it were, linked to climate change in 5 ecosystems: the highland ecosystems, the dryland ecosystems, the Lake Victoria, and the aquatic ecosystems. Now, after that, there were also activities, short-term activities. It was a short-term activity. After that activity, then you need to look at the medium and long term. So the negotiations shifted now. We say, what do we do for the medium to long term? Then we took on what we call the NAPs, National Adaptation Plans. Not plans of action, but National Adaptation Plan, the NAPs. And at Doha, this year, the decision was passed. The decision was a key yes, it's moving on. It's not dead yet, but one of the bottlenecks has been, I think, communicating what has been done in communities. And somehow, we had this long time back. When I was growing up, there was no question about that. You have to have the shamba or the
family garden.
That's right. Family
crash or plot.
Had, trenches across, if you understand. You had to have latrines. There's no question the chief came around every 3 months. There was no question. The road was maintained communally. You had to maintain according to the state standards, whatever the chief, the area of the road along your land. There's no question. Somehow we lost that, but you need to get back on that. Again, in the end, it will be us. Unless we become little children, we'll have to become little children and start as well from scratch. If you start higher with the high tech, you need the tractors to clear the roads. I don't think we'll make it, but you need first to get back to the system where the communities are involved in capturing aspects that we need to capture to safeguard the environment and practice it in practical terms. Enforcement, Morrison talked about the enforcement. You need to, what is it we lost out in terms of enforcement? What went wrong? Neighboring countries have that enforcement, it's quite strong. So we need to get back to that.
And how about government? Peter Amboga was asking government, is government doing what it's supposed to do? Should it come down harder, perhaps? And in what formats? Apart from the community policing, let's look at the macro level, the policy level.
Yeah, the policy level, I shouldn't speak on behalf of the government, but speak as a national of this country. Their credits and their strengths and their weaknesses. In terms of climate change, the policy is coming in press now. The country takes part, this country signed the convention. You have signed the international convention on climate change. You have to build that system. That was an achievement. There was a way forward. That was a positive aspect. You signed the convention and you participate in the process, the convention process. And then, of course, you have the various activities now taking place in various districts at district level. We have the Ministry of Water and Environment. Within the Ministry of Water and Environment, there's a climate change unit. This unit is specifically to take on matters related to climate change. Of course, you may have capacity issues.
Yes.
And it's a process.
Okay.
You can't start with a huge capacity.
You start at a certain point. All right, Morrison, let's hear from you.
Well, I think our national negotiation team and whoever in the ministry, they just need to be sharper and front very serious. They need to tell us the results, where we as a country, what did we benefit much more clearly from these Doha talks that are just concluded. Then the other aspect, which actually echoes Professor, is that climate change is still detached. You see, it is still up there. What is this animal called climate change? Do people understand it? So how do we do a science communication? How do we move away from this science and break it down such that a person in Rukungi, a person in Karamoja, in Amdat can understand it and be able to live in a way that sustains the environment and protects the climate.
Did Buruda come from climate change problems?
Absolutely. It's partly. It's two parts. One, global climate change issues, but the other thing is the responsibility of people who live on the mountain slopes in many ways by cutting down the trees and allowing the soil to be bare, so it's taken away by rain. So there are those two aspects, failure to adapt and all that.
Mind you, there's a population increase.
Yeah.
The increase in the population, the demand is up there. So these are development issues when you have an increase in the population and it's increasing. Yeah. The population growth in Uganda is
so you should produce more children. Some people think many children are a good thing, 9 per woman or 7. What would you advise them if you met them face to face?
Well, my father had 3 children and I have 3 children and they're fully grown, they are independent now.
There is no problem with the population if the quality of the population is good.
Let's talk about cows just before we go. Cows emit methane. Is it proportionate to the value we get out of a cow, or should we begin to eat other things?
No, it's non-anthropogenic gases.
What does that mean?
It means that they are gases that are natural. They are not like fossil fuels.
But a cow actually emits methane, and methane is worse than carbon dioxide.
No, it's not like the one from the fuels. So it can be managed. So the most important thing is how do we manage cows in order to reduce that kind of carbon that they emit.
We have to go.
Keeping a little bit on that.
Half a minute. 10 seconds.
The methane is produced by bacteria called methanogenic bacteria. Methanogens.
That's very scientific.
You find these naturally in the lumen of the cow.
Yes.
In principle, if you puncture
when it belches, it comes out.
It comes out. So some cows are more efficient in digesting, so that there's a little methane.
All right.
But
efficiency is important.
Well, we have to go. Time cuts us. Thank you very much, Dr. Professor John Kaddu, Professor of Zoology at Makerere University and the lead negotiator at the recently concluded Doha Climate Change Conference, specializing in adaptive policies. Thank you for coming to Spectrum tonight. Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, Chief Executive of Agency for Transformation, also former manager of the Uganda Farmers Federation. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond. Spectrum will be back tomorrow. Thank you. I cheated myself on my normal.
Join us for Blankets and Wine 2, this 16th December from 1 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. at Chadondo Rugby Grounds, Lugogo. And performing live on stage is one of South Africa's best live bands,